Welcome to Future Horizons, the Tempest podcast. I'm your host, Zevi Watmough. Over the coming months, we will be publishing a series of conversations that aim to discover more about this landmark engineering programme led from the UK by the Team Tempest partners UK MOD, BAE Systems, Leonardo, MBDA and Rolls-Royce. Over the series, we'll introduce you to many of those team members responsible for driving the programme forward, discover more about the strategic importance to the UK's military capability, and find out how this technological innovation is inspiring the next generation of engineers. Today's podcast will have two parts. The first will explore Tempest as a technological driver for future security and prosperity, while the second will look at how we can engage the next generation of engineers and innovators, or Generation Tempest. We're going to start by taking a look back on what has been achieved so far on the Tempest programme, reviewing its journey to date, including a year of unprecedented challenges, followed by a wider exploration of its future direction and its technological and economic value to the UK aerospace industry and the nature's future prosperity. So, to kick us off for our first episode, we are delighted to be joined by Michael Christie, Director of Future Combat Air Systems, BAE Systems, Andrew Howard, Director of Major Air Programmes at Leonardo, and Defence Journalist, Analyst and Historian Francis Tusa. So, for those listeners who are not already familiar with Tempest or our industry, can you explain why this might be described as the most important technological engineering project that we'll see in a generation? Francis, if I could ask you that first.
Well, although a lot of the attention has been, naturally, you could say, upon a new fighter aircraft, bomber, let's use all those phrases. That's how the public would perceive it. It is a lot more than just a manned aircraft. Of course, that aircraft might also be unmanned. There will be, let's again use words which some people don't like, drones, UAVs, armed UAVs, UCAVs in the terminology. Again, the phrase system of systems is massively overused, but Tempest is not just one single thing. It is a whole host of new technologies. And so, whereas in the past with the Tornado program, dating back to the 1960s when it kicked off, then Typhoon, which kicked off, I'd say, early mid-1980s, you were pretty much always looking at just an aircraft. Everything else came subsequently. Weapons, you name it, sensors, extra sensors. Tempest is not that. It is a radical use of technologies across the piece, bringing multiply different capabilities over what's gone before.
Andrew, expanding on that, can you describe the technologies that are being brought together in this programme?
Thank you. I think first, just to reflect on what Francis said, I mean, the difference between this aircraft system and what's gone before is extraordinary. This is the first time we've designed an aircraft system like this in the era of mobile phones, in the eras of common laptop computing. Tornado and Tempest was still traditional drawing board activity. So the quantum change in technology is extraordinary. And what we've now got today is as Francis indicated, a leap forward in the sensor capability, in the propulsion capability, and obviously we've all seen some of what's gone on in America and elsewhere. And so I think the scale of change that the Tempest represents as a concept over all that's gone before, and its recognition it's likely to be in service for most of the century that we're now in, the 21st century, is an amazing change.
Michael, just looking ahead, this programme is set to run until, for decades into the future. So to do a bit more scene setting, can you explain why it's going to be very important that people have a clear understanding of the programme?
Yeah, just building on what Francis and Andrew have said, the complexity that Francis talked about is made even worse by the fact that the military challenges are changing rapidly. So there's a rapid change in the threat. As a result, there's going to have to be a rapid change in that complex system that Francis described. So I think understanding that is going to be different. It's just like Francis said right at the outset, this isn't a single aircraft anymore. So the understanding how the system develops through time will be quite different as well. And I suspect that the rate of change is going to be something that we've never dealt with before. As a result, some of the things that are absolutely fundamental to the programme and to the development of the system are some modern things, very much based on the IT and the telephone, the telecoms businesses, because that open architecture and that ability to rapidly change is going to be something that's going to be important for the rest of the life of the programme.
And over the past year, a diversity of thought has actually been very important for the survival of many businesses. And Michael, just staying with you, as part of Team Tempest, can you describe the journey you've witnessed your teams go through in what has been an incredibly challenging year? And what has happened at BAE over the past year to respond in an agile and responsive way?
Yeah, well, it's been amazing in a way, because I think I'll never forget March the 23rd of last year, because it was quite a bizarre day. I ended up being one of the last people in the office before everybody was sent home. But the rapid reaction of getting collaborative tools to work, whether it's WebEx or Skype or Microsoft Teams, and that becoming our new way of working together, it was a pretty rapid response. And as Team Tempest, not just BAE Systems, but across the team, we reacted to that very quickly and didn't really miss a beat. We had some very complex deliverables last year to provide to the customer, and we didn't miss any of them across the team. And that's a massive testament to the folk that rallied around. Now I'm probably slightly biased because my wife is in charge of IT for my part of the business. So I've seen the level of stress that the IT teams go through to keep things operating, and she was absolutely maxed out for months. But we all benefited from it in the end. But I think the other thing that I saw was it was a test of and a proof of the strength of the relationship across the team, because there were certain things that would have been incredibly difficult if we hadn't put the effort into building a good team, that whether that be inside Team Tempest or the work we did with our international partners, and still we were able to make the progress through last year that led to, in the end, to the signing of a trilateral MOU between us, the UK, Sweden and Italy. That wouldn't have been done without very, very strong collaboration. So in spite of everything last year, I think it was a really, really high-performing year.
Andrew, did you see a similar type of story unfolding at Leonardo over the past year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the reality of it is the industry is in many respects very, very similar across the big companies. Very similar experience to Michael. We had a sort of sharp intake of breath last year in March, thinking, crikey, this is serious. What happens next? But of course, in truth, what happened next was good IT was rolled out across the team. It went relatively well. Confidence grew relatively quickly. And I think looking back at the end of last year, we were all very, very pleasantly surprised from a business perspective as how resilient the organisation had proven to be, how well people had worked from home despite the restrictions and constraints. People had got on, delivered, and contributed very, very well to the programme. And it was unprecedented in every sense. People were obviously personally affected in different ways by what was going on around us, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But at its core, from a pure program perspective, the progress that was achieved throughout last year was a testament to the industry, to the people, to the IT infrastructure, and to the desire to make this happen. And it did well.
Francis, as you observed everything unfold, what was it like from the outside looking in?
The current perception of Tempest is it was only launched in 2018 when it was actually launched in 2015. And, it is something which is certainly missed across the channel by the rival SCAF team. So it's a program that has so far gone from absolutely strength to strength. And what Michael mentioned about the tri-national agreement, that was a absolutely crucial step. And you've had people who have basically rubbished Tempest. It's not serious, it's only the Brits and the others aren't really involved. They've had to go back and reassess how they view it.
So speaking about the nature of that change, there can be a lack of opportunities in the public arena to explain to the general public why defence spending is important and what it contributes to society. And this is particularly difficult at a time when people are worried about their jobs, they're worried about their health due to COVID-19, and there is a general focus on government spending. So can you explain why it's important that funding to high-tech programmes like Tempest continues, why it represents value for money, and what the wider implications are if it doesn't go ahead? So Michael, if I hand that over to you just to get us started on that.
Yeah, well, I think whenever questions about value for money in our sector are raised, I'll go back to a basic, that the reason that we do what we do is to defend the nation. So it is fundamentally an incredibly important reason that we do what we do. I think in the case of this programme, there's something also that's very, very important, and that's a phrase that's used a lot in the Ministry of Defence, and it's freedom of action, the ability for the UK to do what it needs to do to defend itself without having to lean on anyone else, to put it crudely. And that freedom of action really requires us to have the capability in the UK. And this programme is incredibly important in that regard, because it's restoring and preserving that capability for us to act on our own. I think if you then sort of expand it beyond that, the combat air sector as a whole has had a long history of bringing not just to that aspect of defence, but also from a point of view of the economic benefit. The combat air sector has traditionally contributed at 80% plus of the defence exports in the country. So it brings in a significant amount of money every year, on average £6 billion a year it brings into the nation. So as well as the basics of defending the nation and giving the nation the ability to act on its own, it also brings in significant prosperity, all of which are quite important in the environment we live in at the moment.
Andrew, do you think the industry is connected to future British prosperity in the minds of the public yet, or is there work to be done in this area?
I think there is work to be done, although I also think there's a recognition that the aerospace defence sector at a very basic level is a source of long-held sort of national pride for all the reasons Michael has touched on. I think the reality of it is that the type of jobs we create and we need are absolutely key to the government's broader agenda. They're STEM jobs, they're jobs founded in science and mathematics. And if we want to be a free trading manufacturing nation, which seems to be very much the focus of today's government agenda, we are serving that need well, on top of the things Michael mentioned around the defence need, the freedom of action piece. So I'm very confident that the project is in the national interest in a very broad sense.
Francis, you are somebody who is always analysing the financials around defence, and they very much tell a story. How would you tell the story of this huge programme to the public, using financials to explain it to them?
Well, the starting point is to actually really start explaining. And if I would have, for want of an expression, a criticism to date, is that Team Tempest and the whole programme is still sitting very much in the shadows. And if you were to, I suspect, have a public opinion poll, whatever you want to call it, the awareness of Tempest and thus what it means to the country, the levelling up agenda, the rebalancing of the economy, most people in this country would not have a clue.
And if we expand on that a bit, Francis, can you describe just how you would lay out Tempest's future trajectory in terms of its contribution to British prosperity agenda, global Britain, and how would you lay out that evidence? Because that is a challenge in itself.
Looking at it on a British level, you first off start pointing out where the jobs are being created, where they're being maintained. Again, this just requires a degree of openness, saying, we've given a subcontract for X in Y area. I suppose the advantage about aerospace, but also defence aerospace, is a lot of the subcontractor base isn't, and I'm deliberately exaggerating, it's not in London. It's not in the southeast. It is actually further north. It's Midlands and the northwest. As such, trying to get the rebalancing of the economy, so moving away from services, but also rebalancing the economy away from the south. It's a pretty easy win to say that something like Tempest ticks pretty much every single box.
Michael, just building on Francis's point, how would you describe BAE Systems' stance on its contribution in this area?
Well, as you say, building on what Francis has said, we've got a very strong story to tell here. And whilst I accept what Francis has said, I think we could and should do more to get the message out there. Last October, we did a broadcast where it was hot on the heels of a study we had done by PwC to look at the economic benefits. And And this is, I would say, quite a conservative assessment at the moment, but you're talking about 20,000 jobs that this programme is going to create across the country, and 26 billion pounds worth of value that it's going to bring. And in that regional benefit, 80% of the value is outside London and the southeast. To build on Francis's point, it's there are significant nodes, if you like. There's the southwest around Filton and Bristol, and then there's the northwest around the BAE sites of Wharton and Samlesbury, but also Royce, MBDA. An awful lot of our supply chain are in the northwest. It's created a magnet for employment for many, many years that has gone without much publicity, and I sometimes wonder whether it's because we're in defence and we hide it because it's sensitive and so on. I actually think we should bang our chest and beat the drum and get out there and tell everybody this is a fantastic industry and it's a fantastic employer and it adds a huge amount of value. So I do agree with Francis. We should do more on this.
Andrew, I think that I agree with what you're saying, Michael, because I think the defence industry in general has a bit of a problem about pushing itself forward in a positive way, because historically there's been a level of reticence and it's been quite conservative in the way it's communicated about itself in the public arena. So how can we change that to adapt to changing times and to open up the industry a bit?
Well, I think the interesting point about this program, as Michael and Francis have said, is actually it's a changing threat environment that's defining a changing need for a different type of project, and I think that extends to this type of question as well. The very old-fashioned idea of war, in simplistic terms, is quite a different thing today. So what we're actually talking about is a range of threats that we weren't anticipating during the era of previous aircraft design activity. So as we bring our program forward to reality, we're talking about things like cyber threats. We're talking about things where it's not black and white, where there's the grey area of dispute, of conflict, of war is the real thing. And I think that probably plays to the public consciousness in a very different way. They want to feel secure and defended. They want to be in an industry. They want to feel that their society, that their state is creating an environment that is modernising and protecting against changing and evolving threat. And I think the timing of our program, the nature of the program, and all of the many benefits that have been articulated, the cross-UK reach of all that we do, the significant presence in Scotland, into that UK footprint, is all crucial to the narrative that says a nationwide response to a changing threat in a changing time.
And that changing time is really characterised by a lot of contrast, a lot of stark contrast, because on the one hand you've got a skills base that's got to keep pace with advancing technology, but on the other you've got a stark global economic environment created by the pandemic that's affecting families across the country. So the aspirational aspect that goes along with the aerospace industry could have a conflicting narrative to people's personal experience of daily life. So how do you think industry should approach this challenge to ensure that the morale and motivation of current and future generations of engineers are properly plugged into the massive potential of engineering on the world stage as a realistic prospect, and that we really do have a chance to realise the government's vision of a global Britain? Francis, if I could ask you that first.
Okay, the very simple one, just constantly get the message out there. On a more local basis, and do actually know that MBDA and BAE Systems are doing this. You work with your local partners, be they sixth form colleges, schools, universities. If people know, oh yeah, X, they went off after they graduated and they got this really good job. That is the type of self-perpetuating news where once you've got it going, quite frankly, you hardly have to do any work because everyone else does the talking for you. So it is just, and I hate using the word messaging, it is getting the message out there and making sure that everyone knows it. So at one level, it almost becomes second nature. Let's use a nasty word, it becomes blasé. Oh yeah, Tempest, yeah, they employ lots of people. Yeah, fine, that's not news. But that's good. If people know it, you've won the battle.
Andrew, how do you think we should be plugging into the next generation to make sure that they're not only aware but energised by the prospects that we could be offering them?
I think one of the things that's become clear in the last 12 months or so against the challenging backdrop we've all seen is there's been a much greater appreciation by our young people of the relative security of the defence sector. The long-term nature of the projects becomes a sort of a comfort blanket. And I think if you look at Tempest in that context, it's not wrong to describe it as a beacon of hope. It's a project that has longevity, it has innovation. It's going to take us from a situation of difficulty that we're currently facing to potentially being the backbone of our Air Force's capability for many, many years. And for people embarking on their career, for people thinking about a career in aerospace and defense, the fact that these programs are going to last for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and beyond is hugely energizing. And we think that's going to be an attractive message for people to hear.
Michael, how is BAE approaching this challenge, and how are you connecting with young people, particularly given there's a challenge that we're really communicating remotely right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly we're slightly hindered by the fact that we can't go out and do some of the things that we would normally do, like go to the Big Bang show and attract people to various air shows and things like that around the country. But there's a lot of that we can do virtually. And Generation Tempest, we created that hashtag a couple of years ago, and it attracted and continues to attract people. And we're continuing to do what Francis talked about, is connecting with the schools and making sure that the messages are out there. I do think that some of this is self-perpetuating in a positive way, though, because the Tempest brand has definitely caught on, and as somebody who's been in the industry for 37 years, this is my 37th year in the industry. The thing that attracted me as a sort of young teenager in Ayrshire, along with people like this guy called Norman Bone, who's I think a teenager in Ayrshire at the same time, we used to see Concorde flying past because it used to test at Prestwick Airport. Things like that, those iconic images, do make a difference, and I think we've created an iconic image. Notwithstanding Francis's point about it's not just an aircraft, it still is a fantastic icon for people, and it does trigger people to do what both Andrew and Francis have said. And it was interesting. I've sponsored the launch of the Tempest Early Careers Network and helped them launch it on Friday morning. And it just to follow up on what Andrew said, the number of young people in their sort of early 20s saying this is something that's going to be there for 40 years. We are going to be a community that grows up together over that period. That was quite inspiring for me to hear that, because I've heard for a number of years, the new generation are different. They just want to hop around. That's not what I heard on Friday morning. This provides them with that kind of platform for a very long career, like I have. Fantastic, enjoyable career. And if people can see that, why wouldn't they want to go for it?
And some of the future generation won't only be working for the primes, they'll be working in the supply chain that will support them. And do you think that, again, another opportunity to publicise the benefits of this programme is to show the geographical spread across the SMEs across the UK? Francis, what's your thinking on that?
Very much. With the current assumptions of this government that they want to rebalance the economy, both in terms of the type of work the country does and regionally, the supply base is going to be absolutely vital. And it is actually quite easy to prove where the jobs are and where they're going. And once you start getting MPs and the like going, oh, right, so my constituency, I didn't think we had anyone working in, in aerospace defense. And you go, oh, yeah, you've got 3 companies and they're doing this, suddenly interest grows, and again it becomes self-perpetuating. You will people like Michael will have been bombarded by MPs going, tell me more about what's going on, and after a while saying, oh God, can we get them off our back? But it's good once you have enough MPs especially saying, yes, this is important to my constituency for skills, for education and for long-term jobs. Again, it's self-perpetuating.
Andrew, do you think that the regional aspect of the contribution can actually make it a more interesting story to tell, because you have people offering different types of innovation that are perhaps at a lower level than the large programmes, but are still contributing in a very important way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're constantly surprised at how strong and vibrant the SME community are, and how despite the relatively small geography of our sort of nations, it's a huge diversity of approach, of mindset, whether that's based upon geographical conditioning, whether it's based upon education. When we're reaching out to organisations across the UK, we see different ideas and different approaches coming forward. So I think, just to add what's been said by Francis, I think we will see an enormous diversity of organisations involved. I think we're pleased to see, and I think this is linked to the sort of changing nature of the platform. This is definitely more than the big defence companies working together. This is a community of our country's leading lights, our best thinkers and innovators coming together to try and drive a freshness of mindset, and it's bringing a lot of diversity. And I think we're really energised by that.
Michael, why does the SME offer a real contribution in terms of its agility and its ability to do fast-track prototyping and contribute a freshness of perspective?
Well, just for that reason, really, they do bring different perspectives, and it's always good for us to make sure that we don't get sort of trapped in our we are big companies, and big companies tend to have a particular way of operating. It's always good to get a view of somebody else. I think that I mentioned right at the beginning about the rate of change. The idea that somehow we have got the solution today that's going to be the solution in 20, 30, 40 years' time is pretty ludicrous. So I think the SMEs also provide us with a level of flexibility of solution space as well. There's a massive misconception that we keep all the work to ourselves in the big industries. It's not true invariably, and it's the same actually for most of the first few tiers of the few tiers of the structure. We invariably buy about 60% of what we make, and that's the same for all of, I think nearly all of the partners are roughly the same. So those SMEs bring innovation, they bring challenge, as Andrew said, they bring diversity, and whether that's diversity of thought or diversity of technology, either way that's very valuable to us, especially when things are changing so rapidly. So we've always tried to embrace them. I think it becomes even more important in this programme just because of the breadth and the complexity of it.
Ending on a slightly lighter note now, the premiere of the Top Gun sequel, Top Gun Maverick, starring Tom Cruise, has been pushed to summer this year due to the pandemic. And if you imagined you had the opportunity to walk today's Maverick around the future system, which we envisage Tempest becoming, what are the main attributes you'd like to point out to him in terms of capability, and what do you think his reaction would be? Francis, I offer you this invitation to imagine you're walking with Maverick around Tempest.
Well, we are going to see, just because computing power, processing, software have changed, so many differences. Degrees of automation, which I know Michael's touched on, the fact that with Tempest, the talk about the digital cockpit, where you do not have all these displays, there's almost nothing. It's all coming into a helmet-mounted display. The degree to which, and I know purists would hate this, the pilot isn't really flying the aircraft like he or she, I have to say that because that's the other difference, he and she will be flying this aircraft and managing the system. It's going to be requiring a totally new, different set of skills. So I suspect Maverick will be going, you can do what? Would be the key reaction, because compared to showboating with those MiGs, Maverick and Goose will be able to be doing a lot more. And actually, I think that's an interesting point that Michael made earlier about the fact that Typhoon produces more data than a single pilot can take care of, even with AI. Here's the question, Michael. Is the role of a rear seater coming back into fashion?
It's the second time I've been asked that question in the last couple of weeks, actually. I don't believe so. I think that other seat is going to be taken by a piece of artificial intelligence, or other, very intelligent, but not necessarily requiring another person. I think the general trend is keep people out of harm's way. So the idea that we're going to put more people back in cockpits, I don't think is going to be the trend going forward. I'm sure we could have a very long debate about that, Francis.
Andrew, what would you be saying to Maverick?
Well, I think, Francis has touched on many of the points. I mean, the reality of it is that we've been showing them what an amazing advancement Tempest represents over all that they've seen before. I've obviously been pointing out the unique power of the radar and the sensor array that's going to have huge amounts of range and capability. And I would be pointing out that the computer is going to be an awful lot brighter than they are. I mean, I think the reality of it is there'll still be some commonality in at this stage. We anticipate having a manned, personed variant. We expect a variant that will be able to do lots of things of a similar nature, And I think the film had the strap line about feeling the need for speed, and we still expect the Tempest will deliver on that as well.
Well, thank you to all of you today for delivering such interesting insights into Tempest technology. Tempest is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shape one of the UK's most exciting engineering programmes from the inside out. Most of those likely to be piloting and maintaining the system in 2040 and beyond won't even be in school yet, and those who'll be responsible for the system's final design and transformative technology are probably only now taking their first steps into their burgeoning career. The next generation of engineers and innovators, or Generation Tempest, will therefore play an absolutely vital role in the development and delivery of the Tempest programme. As part of this year's National Apprenticeship Week, we sat down with just a few of the talented professionals and STEM ambassadors from Leonardo, BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce who currently form part of Team Tempest to ask them to share their thoughts on the programme and the importance of awakening a new generation to their potential as engineers. Christian Chu works at BAE Systems and is a member of their innovative engineering degree apprenticeship scheme where he's focused on Tempest's exciting concept engineering. Physicist turned engineer Sophie Kaiser is system teams leader and STEM ambassador at Leonardo, as well as a member of the Women's Engineering Society. Rolls-Royce design engineer Raphael Bosk is also a STEM ambassador for the company, and Aditi Vyakkarnam joins us from MBDA, where she works as principal systems engineer, STEM ambassador and committee member for the staff network, championing ethnic diversity within MBDA. So to begin, for the benefit of our listeners, some of whom may be students deciding on their future careers, can you share the moment you realised you wanted to work in engineering, starting with you, Christian?
Right, yeah. I think in our school there had been always the assumption that most people would just go to uni, and I was just carrying on that track really, just sort of picking my one or two best subjects and going down that route. And then I think I realised at some point that I was spending pretty much all my free time or my break and lunch times in the workshops and in the IT suites, fascinated by we just got some 3D printers and some CAD software and stuff like that. And I realised it was kind of stupid for me to be picking chemistry or something when I wasn't that interested in it. And it just made sense to go and follow that path down to engineering, really.
Sophie, was it a similar informal introduction to engineering for you, or did you realise you wanted to do it in a classroom setting?
No, not at all. So slightly controversially, I'll say that I didn't really choose engineering, to be honest. I was very into physics at school, and then I went on and did a physics degree at uni. And it wasn't really until I got to the end of my degree where I had to think, well, what am I actually going to do as a job now? And that's where I found that actually physicists can be engineers as well. And that's really how I got into engineering.
Aditi, did you feel that engineering was something that was a genuine prospect for you, or was it, like Sophie described, something that you found yourself moving towards after you graduated?
So I think I was sort of strangely focused on engineering actually from quite a young age. I think I was about 14 or 15 when I came back from a theme park and decided I wanted to work on things that were cool and fast, much to my parents' amusement. And then at sixth form, I went on a residential course actually called Head Start, which was meant to give you a taste of engineering, because obviously it's not something you normally learn at school. And there we got to fly a helicopter simulator, do lots of sort of more day-to-day engineering tasks, and that's kind of where I decided it was for me.
I think that the physical aspect of engineering can be massively impressive and engaging. And Raphael, did you have any early awareness of what engineering can achieve?
Yeah, I think that's very related to my case, actually, because I think for me it was more about the curiosity about how the world works, about discovering nature and discovering physics and discovering how the universe works. And that really motivates me, and that's why I started engineering. And it's curious because I think the more I learned about it, the more I like it. So I think it's also like I'm discovering every day that I like what I do. I think when you are choosing at 17 or 18, you are very, very young and you don't know enough. And it's curious how the more you know about engineering, the more you like it, I would say.
I think that's a really interesting point you've made, Raphael, because it's STEM ambassadors will often say that they really enjoy watching young people go through that process of a type of awakening to engineering, where the world suddenly becomes a lot more dynamic because they get an insight into the workings of the world through engineering. And I guess what would be quite interesting to understand is the most surprising thing about engineering that you've experienced in your daily life that you wouldn't have expected before starting in your roles. Raphael, staying with you on that.
Yeah, I think what surprised me most is about how important is collaboration, I would say. So I think when I was in uni and when I was a child, I expected that I knew that professors knew everything or almost everything about the topic. And I think when you go to the real world and you face the challenges we face in engineering, you discover that there are a lot of people who know a lot, but it's more about putting all that knowledge together, and it's about using the best of everyone to solve problems. And I think that's a thing I discovered when I started in the company, and something I didn't know before exactly.
Aditi, was it similar for you? Did you feel a new awareness of the human dimension of engineering? Was that a surprise? And what else surprised you about engineering?
So I think that's quite interesting, and I think it can vary a lot from how people are taught engineering. Ours was very group focused. So I think I carried that enjoyment with me into my daily work, and probably why I like systems engineering so much. But I think when I was mulling this over, it's honestly, for me, the most surprising thing is actually how little we know, and being okay with that ambiguity and then kind of experimenting as a collective and collaboratively, as we've said. I think for me, that was probably the most surprising thing, was that, I think especially when I'm working in future systems, a lot of what we do is kind of experimenting with ideas. So being okay with that and feeling free to be creative in that space, I think is what's really surprised me the most.
There are a lot of assumptions that we know so much more, I think, from the outside looking in. But I think part of the thing that makes engineering interesting is its exploratory nature. Would you agree with that, Sophie? And was that part of your awakening in engineering?
Well, yeah. Having been interested in physics, very similar to what Raphael was saying, actually. Discovering the world around me was the kind of interest that I had, really. And yeah, I've taken that kind of like interest through into what I do now, and I do a lot of applied research, which is all about working with groups of people at universities, and also in the kind of setting of Team Tempest as well. We're working with people across different industries, and figuring out how we can explore and discover these new technology areas.
It's so interesting because engineering involves a lot of cross-fertilisation between academia and industry itself. Christian, were you aware of that before you got into engineering?
I think I'd been told that, but didn't really realise what that meant in reality. But I think it's definitely a nice surprise when you get in there, and you realise that it really just is a melting pot of different ideas, different departments coming together. And like you said before, that we're sort of starting almost from a blank slate. So much to discover with all the different projects. You need to bring in new people. You need to contact different departments, different disciplines all the time.
I think that the working environment is very dynamic at the moment, and it will have to accommodate the future generation that we sometimes refer to as Generation Tempest, who will be inevitably pass the baton of developing Tempest technology far into the future. Can you describe the types of tasks that you would envisage an engineer of the future might perform? Aditi, what would you say?
So this is a really exciting one for me. I think as a systems engineer, I think this is our opportunity to kind of spread that mentality a little bit, which is to not just think about problems in a very sort of specific, department-specific way, but actually to kind of expand that bubble so far out. You know, we're not just talking about, in MBDA's case, a weapon on a platform. We're talking about a weapon on a platform that can communicate in so many different ways to so many different things, and kind of just growing that sphere of how we consider the problem space. I think so having people that can sort of think in that way, in these sort of big problem space ways, I think is going to be really important.
Raphael, how do you see that kind of big thinking playing into the formation of future roles?
Yeah, I think that's very, very important, because I think in the future we will be able to automatize more problems and to solve things quickly. But I think the difference is that we are still able to make intelligent decisions, and that we are able to understand larger and larger problems. Like Aditi said, this is not about an isolated problem. It's about connecting different pieces of the puzzle, and I think that's the key for the future. It's about making intelligent decisions, being able to have a robust thinking, I would say. So yeah, I think that will be the future.
I think you're spot on, because you hear more and more about integrated systems and systems thinking. And Chris, what do you see coming up that might tie into that?
Yeah, so I think I guess from a technical side, going down from the systems level, you've got all the technologies that feed into that, which allow that to happen really. So, we've had since the last generation of aircraft, we've had a massive exponential increase in computing power, different manufacturing techniques, different types of communication, artificial intelligence, automation, all these kind of things, which I think are going to be involved in making that whole systems picture sort of come to life. I think we've seen it in our sort of personal lives with our interconnectivity, our mobile phones and across the internet, and all of that sort of making our lives more interconnected and improved in that way. I think that's just going to be the next step in engineering.
Sophie, do you think there's a way of getting the current generation interested in a sort of systems role, and how do you feel systems roles will develop in the future?
So the systems, I think in the future, the systems roles will essentially be doing the same sorts of processes. So we'll be going through the design process. But as everyone else has already said, because we've got so much more access to more computing power and technology, we'll be able to carry out those tasks in different ways. So we can very quickly now go through design iteration loops using model-based systems engineering. So really what that involves, the future engineers will be writing code essentially to simulate what the final system will be, and then to try basically to very quickly try out new designs without having to actually build something physical. So I think it will be a lot of computer work, and it could actually, augmented reality and other technologies could play into that as well, which is pretty exciting.
I think that's a really interesting point. And how can we make sure that we're increasing diversity by making sure that people from different backgrounds are getting equal access to STEM education? Because of course there are some schools that have enormous STEM programs, but others that don't often have the budgets to participate in the same way. Staying with you, Sophie, on that.
Yeah, so I think, so for Leonardo specifically, we do have our STEM ambassador kind of like outreach program, as do many other engineering companies as well. One of the things that we do look at as an indication of opportunity is number of students receiving free school meals at that school, so that we can try and focus our efforts with those sorts of schools, as well as those who might be less disadvantaged.
And Chris, how do we break those barriers down and keep everyone feeling that they're part of the engineering, the group of people who could pursue careers in engineering in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I think what I've seen is that people respond very well to the marketing of it, really. So women who see other women in engineering in various articles or pieces, it genuinely does have a really big impact and inspire them to think that it's the career for them. I think if we continue that up for all the various different groups, or so that we've got our diversity sort of picture, I think that has a really big impact from a young age and right the way through to support people in their careers, that they've got access to continue climbing, continue moving to different areas, because they see other people doing it.
Aditi, earlier on you were talking about the process you went through to find your voice. Is it also quite important to hear a diverse range of voices from lots of different backgrounds in the public domain when you come to engaging with the engineering community?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say a range of role models, I think, would be a really powerful thing for us to be able to do across all of our companies. I think it gets harder and harder to imagine and aspire to something if you can't see anyone that reflects you. I think that's something that people are waking up to now. So, when we are looking at advertising, and I don't mean for companies to do it in a sort of a false way, so, to pick on the same people to represent them. But yeah, to kind of think that through when we're recruiting, when we're advertising, and also when we're going into schools and into places of education, to try and give a more representative view of what engineering might be in the future, I think could be really powerful.
Raphael, building on what Aditi said, why is that sense of authenticity important in terms of making people feel comfortable and included?
Yeah, I think that point was really, really good. And I think role models are very important for this. I think you can't be what you can't imagine. And I think having those role models, it's what we need really to tell the people you can be an engineer if you want, or you can be whatever you want in life. So yeah, I really like that idea.
And just finally, there are young people who might be listening who have gone through a turbulent year with a lot of change, and they may be unsure as to whether they could be engineers. Are there any words of encouragement you'd like to leave them with, starting with you, Aditi?
Yeah, I'd say it's been an incredibly challenging year, but I think it's also shown us the capacity for what humans can do when we're in really tough times. We've managed to get a vaccine to millions of people in amazingly short order. That takes real resilience and aspiration and creativity. And I would just say, just please keep aspiring, because we really can achieve things. So yeah, go for your dreams and reach out. We're in a virtual world now. You don't just have to be confined to the resources that you would normally have. There's so many different forums on the internet, so many different things through LinkedIn. The world is kind of even more our oyster in some ways because of what we now have virtually.
Raphael, what message would you like to leave with young people?
I think that message about being brave, about being bold, it's the most important thing to remember. We all have been there. We all had that questions, and I think by being brave and by facing that important decisions, you can achieve whatever you want. And I think that's something that we all have to remember, and we all have to be optimistic about the future.
Chris, what would you say to young people right now?
Yeah, I think certainly the last year has shown us that the path isn't going to be straightforward, really. You're always going to get challenges, but I think challenges and overcoming those are par of the course, really, for this industry. And I think overcoming them is probably what makes it worth pursuing, really.
Absolutely. And Sophie, what message would you like to leave people today?
Yeah, so I think if you have an interest or a passion, just follow it. Don't worry if people are telling you that it's not for you or anything like that. If you can get access to the internet, then try and research some stuff. There's loads of videos for STEM challenges online, small things that you can try out. Or if you don't have access to the internet, just sort of try and create things at home with what you have.
Aditi, Raphael, Chris and Sophie, thank you very much for your great input today and your great ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us again for the next episode of Future Horizons, the Tempest podcast.